This podcast is for SEO professionals, and each week, with the help of our wonderful guests, we discuss the important stuff that actually affects our careers and progression, but sadly often doesn't get talked about. You know, the invaluable soft and interpersonal skills that are often taken for granted, such as the skills we need for listening, time management, communication, and more. We also talk about the big issues that affect us and our careers, such as burnout, imposter syndrome, self-belief, saying no, plus other big issues and obstacles. With this podcast, we want to share knowledge on topics that unlock our listeners' true potential and enhance not only their careers, but all parts of their lives. So, are you ready to prioritize your own personal growth and career development? Then let's crack on with this week's episode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the SEO Mindset Podcast, where your hosts are myself, Tasmin Suleiman, and my wonderful friend Sarah McDowell. We have episodes coming out every Thursday, and this week I spoke to Hannah Smith, the founder of Worderist.com, on how to write a compelling speaker pitch, because I hear from so many in our industry who are so keen to speak at a conference this year. It's one of their goals, so we thought let's record an episode that's going to help you do just that. Now, Hannah, as I said, is the founder of Worderist.com, and via that company, Hannah offers consultancy, coaching, training, and support to help develop and grow creative, production, and PR teams, improve processes, and deliver results. With more than 15 years in the industry, her creative work has won her multiple awards, and she's worked on with a range of companies, including BBC, Dyson, Expedia, MailChimp, and Salesforce. She's also spoken at numerous conferences across Europe and the US, interviewed Google's John Mueller live on stage in front of an audience of more than 3,000, and acted as a guest lecturer at the University of Greenwich in London. She has a wonderful newsletter called Manufacturing Serendipity. There's a link in the show notes, where she shares short essays and some of the unexpectedly delightful things that she's encountered each fortnight. It was wonderful speaking to her on this topic that she has so much experience in, and she had such a refreshing angle on the whole topic of pitching. My big takeaway was pitch a talk that only you can give. Now, before we dive in and listen to what Hannah has to share, a quick reminder that if you are enjoying what Sarah and I are doing with the podcast and would like to support us, there are various ways you can do that. There's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, where you could give us a cheeky donation so Sarah and I can go off and have a cup of coffee and maybe even a slice of cake. You could write us a review. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave us a review. And the third, share with anyone and everyone you think would benefit from this podcast, and let them know that you've enjoyed it and maybe they'll enjoy it too. Anyway, now let's talk to Hannah. Hello, Hannah. Welcome to the SEO Mindset Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
I was just saying to Hannah before we hit record that this is such a lot, because we're recording on a Friday, and it's such a treat to be chatting to Hannah on a Friday afternoon. It's one of the last things I'll be doing today. So it feels like, you know, when you're in an office setting, it's like the wrap-up part of the day where you just do the nice stuff. This is my nice stuff of the week.
Thank you. This is my nice stuff too. And also, I don't know if it's fair to say this, today is also the last day of January. And as we know, January is, about 1,000 days long. So this Friday feels extra special, I think, for that reason.
Treat Friday. I'm really pleased that we're talking about about this topic because January also means goal setting. And people will be looking to set their goals, and so many of them are looking to set goals around personal speaking, doing talks, all of that. And they have that thing in their head, and absolutely they should do it. But then what? And this is why I'm really pleased that we're talking about this, because you've taught me so much about the whole concept and pitching and putting in a pitch, which is what we're going to talk about. If I haven't even said, I'm so excited to be talking to you. I haven't even introduced the topic. Everyone, rewind a little bit. Introducing the topic, it is about how to write a compelling speaker pitch. Honestly, Sarah's going to listen back to this and say, did I teach that girl nothing?
It's fine. It's fine. It's all fine. We're all good. It's Friday.
First of all, like, how do you even figure out what to talk about?
Yeah. So I think figuring out what to talk about is probably the biggest challenge. And it's probably the thing that I'm asked about most frequently. And I think there are a couple of approaches to this. And I think often what happens is people begin with a question like, what am I an expert in? So they'll start with that question. And honestly, I don't love that approach. I don't love it for a variety of reasons. First of all, I think it tends to trigger imposter syndrome. So if you ask yourself, what am I an expert in? Like the imposter syndrome, well, for me at least, I don't know about anyone else, but certainly for me, imposter syndrome leaps straight in and goes, absolutely nothing. You are an expert in nothing. So I don't love it for that because it kind of shuts things down straight away. The other reason I don't love it is that I think that it can lead to kind of generic best practice style talks, which honestly, I don't love. I don't think attendees love. I don't really think conference organizers love either. And then finally, the real reason, I guess, that I don't love the what am I an expert in as a starting point is honestly because your expertise is not unique. None of us, like our expertise is not what makes us unique. What makes us unique is our brain, our lived experiences, the things that we've actually done, the situations we've found ourselves in, and how we have reacted and adapted to those situations. So the first thing that I would kind of say to anybody thinking about what should I do a talk about, I would say, don't worry about whether or not you're sufficiently expert enough to pitch a particular talk. Instead, I would encourage you to pitch a talk that only you could give. And what do I mean by that? I mean really one that's rooted in your lived experience. And essentially, I think, I often kind of say, talks about best practice are tired, but a talk about someone's lived experience plus insights from their unique and wonderful minds, that's wired. That's really exciting. Those are the sorts of talks I get really excited about watching when I'm at conferences. And I think conference organizers know that. So how do you pitch a talk that only you could give? The question I like to start with is really just thinking about what problems or challenges you have personally faced. So I kind of encourage people literally just to make a big old list of all the problems or challenges they've personally faced. Then when you've got your big old list, have a think about which ones have you worked hardest to solve, because I think harder work or more work makes for a more compelling talk. But I would kind of caveat with you don't actually have to have fully solved the problem. I don't think you necessarily have to have fully solved a problem in order to make a good talk. But the work you've put into trying to solve the problem and what you've learned along the way, that will make a really compelling talk. The other thing I like to think about are out of my big old list, what are things which I think other people might have struggled with too? Really, again, this is, I guess, probably slightly more from the conference organizer's perspective. Conference organizers want to put on talks about things that lots of people have found challenging. So again, I think that might make a more compelling talk. And then finally, I think about, and I would encourage if someone else is doing this exercise, I would encourage the person to think about which of these things do you care the most about? Which of these things are you most passionate about? Because when we really care about something, when we're really passionate about something, it makes for a compelling talk. Like, a lot of the hard work is almost done for us because it's a topic we are passionate about.
See, we're only a few minutes in, and already the things that you have said, one, incredibly refreshing, incredibly heartwarming and reassuring. But then there's a whole raft of people who are saying, what are you an expert in? What do you want to be known for? What a key person of influence? And I get sucked into that as well. Okay, I'm going to be really honest and vulnerable here. 5 years ago, Tasman, that would have been, oh no, that's even worse. Like, I don't know anything. I haven't solved anything.
Well, I don't mean for it to be that. Breaks my heart a little bit. I'm sorry if that's the case. Like, a lot of the people who I've spoken to about find it more freeing because they haven't got the expert thing in their head. There are another couple of approaches which I also recommend. So there's the kind of, honestly, most of my talks over time could be grouped into 3 kind of talk types. There's the, here's the problem, here's what I did to try and solve it, and my journey along the way. That's like, that's a classic Hannah talk. Most of my talks are taking that structure. But then there are a couple of other options which people might like to try. And again, I think still kind of come under the category of pitching a talk that only you'd give. So something that's rooted in your experience. So one thing I did in the past was, like, I did a thing, and then talked about what I learned as a result. So, for example, a few years ago, when I was still at Verve Search and I was head of creative there, I spent a year making predictions about how each of our digital PR campaigns would perform before we launched them. And then I gave a talk essentially about my predictions. So I had all these predictions and I did a talk about essentially like what I got wrong, what I got right in terms of the predictions, and what I learned as a result. So that's another option, like do a thing and then do a talk about that thing you did. And obviously, like, it could be anything, you know, maybe it's something like you're really, really, really into large language models. So you have a bash at creating some sort of tool using AI or something like that. Could be anything at all. Then the other flavor of talk, which I have done in the past, and again, I would recommend, is thinking about, are you angry, frustrated, or annoyed about something? If so, do some rigorous work to kind of help you get over your own frustration and annoyance, and hopefully help others too. So the example of this, a couple of years ago, I did a talk for Women in Tech SEO when we went over to Philadelphia. And the talk was all about like my own frustrations over time. I, just like an awful lot of other people, throughout my career had been told to be more strategic, in inverted commas. And when I asked for help in that area, you know, like how do I become more strategic? I got told strategy isn't something you could teach. And of course, I was incredibly frustrated and annoyed by this because I was like, well, you can teach anything. That's just nonsense. So I did a talk essentially all about how to be more strategic. And it was all about like my journey through that, essentially. Like, so what I thought people really meant when they said things like be more strategic. And I tried to give like concrete examples and frameworks to help people appear more strategic at work. So that's like another route in, I guess, which I would suggest. Do any of those sound better to you?
Actually, you know what? I have to apologize because I feel I have been unfair. Because now, when I think back to what did I first speak about at Brighton, it was the importance of age diversity in SEO teams, and that
Okay.
actually was from my own experience. Because the first time I went to Brighton, I thought there's nobody like me. There aren't many
Right?
people my
Yeah.
age. And then that got me to think about the value of having age diversity in teams. So I was unfair to you, Hannah. I apologize. It makes sense. But in a way, I like this word that you use, you know, it's freeing. Having this way of framing a talk can feel liberating, can feel freeing, because as you said, you've only experienced what you have. What have you learned and how can you share it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other, you've leaned beautifully into kind of like a secondary point around like why I like this. I really like pitching talks which are grounded in personal experience. And I like it for a bunch of reasons. Like, one, as a speaker, it gives me confidence, credibility, authority, and gravitas because it's my story. I am just telling my story. No one can tell me my story is wrong. This is what happened. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, it allows me to present in a way where I feel more confident, which as a speaker, I think is really important. I think the other reason I like it is because essentially what we're doing is we're sharing a story. I find that I'm better able to talk concretely about actual things rather than dealing in abstract concepts. And again, that for me kind of gives me confidence. Like, I don't like talking in abstractions. I honestly, I think that audiences don't love it either. It's potentially confusing. Finally, I love it because it gives you a talk structure straight from the off, right? You've got a structure straight away. It's the path of your story, whatever the path your story took. And I think that, like we often say, people remember stories, not facts. And it's so true. Like, human beings are wired for stories. We're wired to understand stories, and we're also wired to respond to stories. So I think, it's a space personally I really love to play in, and I would encourage others to do likewise.
You've made me want to pitch for even more talks now. It's fantastic. And I
Yes, yes.
guess the added benefit is when you're on stage, because many people are nervous about it. Are we going to get what we're going to say? You can't forget your own story. And nobody will know if you have missed out a point. It just gives you that added confidence that you're going onto stage to talk about what happened to you. I am team tell the story that only you can tell and pitch talk about it.
Yay!
So, Hannah, you have hinted about things that the conference organisers and event organisers are looking for, and we're sort of halfway mark. So why don't we take a break now? I'm sure the listeners too are Team Hannah of pitch the talk that only you can give. And then after the break, we'll talk about how you then sell that to the event organisers.
Gorgeous. Thank you.
Sarah here, just quickly popping on to let you know about how you can support the podcast, how you can support me and Tasmin. So first things first, we are set up on Buy Me a Coffee, which means you can give us a one-off donation. Thank you to everyone who has done that already. If you fancy doing that, the link is in the show notes and we'd be very much appreciative. And another way is help us spread the word. Get more people to know about the podcast. Tell your colleagues, friends, loved ones, hey, even your pets. Next time you're listening to an episode and you think someone would really love it, find the link and why not share it with them? Don't forget about that live podcast happening the night before Brighton SEO, which is all about personal brand. Yep, the SEO Mindset and Search with Candour podcasts are teaming up again. It's happening Wednesday the 9th of April 2025 from 7 p.m. at Projects The Lanes. It's free to attend and there'll be free pizza, snacks and drinks. Please help us to spread the word. Tell your friends, work colleagues, anyone and everyone. Help us shout it from the rooftops. It was a sellout last time, so to avoid that horrible FOMO feeling, grab your ticket today to secure your spot. Head on over to the show notes for the link and we look forward to seeing you on the night.
Hannah, welcome back to this wonderful talk, how to pitch for a speaker pitch. We talked before the break about telling your story, essentially, and all of the benefits of it. And during the break, Hannah and I were talking about the added element of emotions and how that can just make the story come alive. So it just seems like win-win-win on this one.
I really hope so. I believe in it. I believe in it for sure. For sure. I think it's a really lovely way to approach structuring a talk and figuring out what to talk about as well.
Supposing somebody listening right now says, right, I want to give a talk on this thing that I experienced, or this thing I tried, or this thing that happened to me. That's fine. That's the first hurdle. There's also the hurdle of actually pitching, but which is another hurdle again. But what about the event organizers? What do they want?
Yeah, so I mean, I think obviously it will vary from event to event, but I think the key considerations for event organizers are probably like there are three things I think that event organizers are looking for. So, one, they'll be thinking about how all of the talks that they are putting on stage, all the people they're putting on stage, how all of those talks fit with an overall program or agenda. Right. So they will be often, and I feel like you often see that actually, particularly with Brighton, like Calvin will often put a shout out and say that, for example, he's specifically looking for talks on a particular topic. And the reason he'll do that is because this is something that he wants covered in the overall event, in the agenda of the event. But up to this point, no one's pitched him a talk on this topic, or not enough people have pitched him a talk on this topic. Maybe there's only one talk on this topic, and he's kind of looking for three complementary takes on this topic, something like that. So, one, how does this talk fit with the overall programming and agenda? Now, in real terms, when you are pitching, you won't know this, right? You're not typically exposed to the overall programming or agenda of the conference. So honestly, I wouldn't sweat this too much, but certainly something I like to do is look back on previous conference agendas to get a sense for what sorts of things does this conference organizer typically look to cover? Like, what does the structure of the day look like? What types of topics are they typically covering? That kind of thing, just to kind of give yourself the best chance of really like pitching your talk to the right conference, essentially, right? The other things which organizers look for, number two, is like, can the content reasonably be delivered in the time allotted? And again, like I used to be quite involved way back when I was at Distilled. Distilled ran conferences. And occasionally I would kind of review pitches from speakers for that conference. And honestly, very often the pitches I was reviewing, my ultimate feeling was that the scope of the talk was so broad that the person giving it would unlikely be able to do it justice, right? Essentially, the person was pitching not one, but maybe three or more different talks, right? And I do think, again, I as an attendee favor tightly focused talks. So I would much rather see a speaker delve into a single topic in some depth rather than kind of scratching the surface of many topics. So I think, broadly speaking, organizers prefer a tightly focused pitch. The other thing which I used to see a bit of is you want to be sure as an organizer that you understand what the speaker is actually planning to talk about and what their talk will contain, right? And I would acknowledge that when you're pitching a talk, this bit's really, really difficult, because whilst it's often the case that the talk that you're pitching is really clear in your mind, like you can see it, you can picture it, you know exactly how you're going to fill those 20 minutes or, you know, however long your speaker slot is. However, oftentimes the pitches I've reviewed, they've kind of suffered from a lack of concrete detail. And after reading the pitch, I'm still not entirely clear what the speaker plans to talk about. So really, this is about essentially finding a way when you're pitching to ensure that you've been as clear as possible about what it is you're going to talk about, and to reassure the event organizer you can deliver this talk in this time slot. So one of the things I recommend doing when you are pitching a conference is include a brief outline. So, for example, if the talk is 20 minutes, I would be like 5 minutes intro, 5 minutes point one, 5 minutes point two, 5 minutes point three, do you know what I mean? Like wrap it up, but kind of break it out like that. So just a brief outline, a brief kind of timed outline, I guess, just to make it just to give the conference organizer confidence that you can actually deliver this thing in the time allowed. It's also really useful. I find this useful personally for me because it forces me to check I can actually deliver the talk in the time allowed. Because even if you just do a very brief outline, you'll quite quickly realize, oh, I'm out of minutes. I can't cover all of these things. Okay, what am I going to cover and what am I going to leave out? The other thing I like to do is include some kind of concrete audience takeaways within the pitch. So that might be, for example, if I'm sharing a framework, I'll say, I'm sharing a framework to help you approach your work more strategically. Or do you understand what I mean? That kind of thing. Or I am, if I've made a tool, I'm sharing my tool, I'm sharing my code, that kind of thing. So that the conference organizer has a clear idea of what it is you are going to be talking about and what it is you are kind of giving for the audience to take away. Then the final piece of the puzzle, I think, that conference organizers think about is essentially the strength of the pitch. So when we're talking about strength of the pitch, we're talking about things like value to the audience, relevance to the audience, that kind of thing. And essentially, I attempt to deal with this stuff by kind of answering the following questions within my pitch. So I tend to weave this stuff in. So I don't literally go here's the question, here's the answer. But what I attempt to weave in is why am I the right person to give this talk? Why? And I guess that's kind of credibility, that kind of thing. I also like to kind of highlight the unique perspective or point of view I can bring. And I also, wherever possible, like to highlight why this is a relevant talk to give right now. And this is probably, honestly, a bit of that's the digital PR in me. So as digital PRs, we pitch journalists, and kind of often a core part of our pitch is, why is this story relevant right now? And I think maybe this is something I've kind of stolen from PR, probably when I'm pitching conferences. But why is this a relevant talk to give right now? Why do you need me on your stage this time, not in 6 months' time or 12 months' time? Why am I the person that you need right here, right now? Why is this talk timely, I guess? Just to kind of wrap that up a little bit, in terms of how I structure a pitch overall, I begin with the talk title and a short description, just a sentence or two. Then I provide what I call background information. So I just write a couple of paragraphs where normally what I do is I make these kind of conversational. So I'll briefly explain what sparked the idea for the talk and show the organizer kind of how I'm going to provide value to the audience, what sparked the idea and what am I kind of bringing. And I'll include relevant information there about my background and experience, about my unique perspective and point of view, a little bit about what I'm offering and why it will be valuable and why it's relevant right now. So yes, we've got title and short description, a couple of paragraphs of background information, the talk outline, as I mentioned before. Essentially it's a mini talk structure. And then finally, audience takeaways. So that's how I would pitch talk. And I'm sure, I don't know if you want to, I wrote a blog post about this.
You did.
I'm sure we can.
I will absolutely add it to the show notes. Absolutely. Definitely. Because what you've given us is so comprehensive, so detailed, hugely valuable. And I know that the blog post goes into more detail and gives an example. And I think that'll just make it really come to life. Just a random question. So you said that different conferences, different events want different things from those pitches. Would it be relevant for them to give a guideline on what they're expecting in the pitches? Because it would make their lives easier, would it not?
Yeah, it would. And some conferences do. So MozCon have said previously, they've given a little bit of an indication as to how they select speakers. And I think that's broadly universal. Like the things that MozCon said they consider when they're kind of figuring out their speaker lineups were definitely the things that we were thinking about when we were putting on conferences and events at Distilled. I'm reasonably confident in saying Reed thinks about very, very similar things when she is figuring out, the speaker lineup for the WTS fests in various locations. She would consider similar things. So I do think these things are fairly universal. And I do think, for what it's worth, I do think that many conference organizers have taken steps to be a bit more transparent about this. So whereas previously, this is going back some time, but kind of like 10, 15 years ago, the pitching process was sort of done in secret. So for a lot of conferences, it wasn't like an open pitching process where there was a form you could fill in. It was just sort of like some people knew that you could pitch, and so they pitched. And some people didn't even know that pitching was a thing, and so they didn't pitch. And I do think like we have seen really positive strides, I think, in our industry being made in terms of I feel like you see far more often now open calls for speaker pitches for major conferences, and also for meetups as well. But yeah, if obviously if a form is, if there is a form to fill in the form,
Yeah.
obviously. But if not, this is a good, if you're there going, oh, I want to pitch this conference, but there's no form, I'm just going to send an email. This is how I would structure the email, for when there is no form.
That's an excellent idea. And I just want to say to anyone who has been through this process or is going to go through this process, if it gets rejected, doesn't mean that it's a you problem. It could be, like you said, Hannah, that's not what they were hoping to have people speak about. It doesn't match their 3-track structure. So don't be disheartened. Try again.
I think it is worth noting that there's so much, as much as I think conference organisers are taking steps now to be more transparent about this process, there is so much that you just can't know. So when you are pitching a talk, you have no idea, for example, whether or not the conference organizer has already had 10 pitches on this exact topic, right? You wouldn't know that. So I do think that sometimes there's an element of like, sometimes it's just a bit of bad luck. Sometimes it might be an editorial decision, to your point, like it just doesn't fit with the overall, with the overall schedule and agenda. But yeah, definitely don't be disheartened.
And sometimes it's a timing thing. So Kelvin will often say the best time to pitch is when I've just finished one Brighton and I'm about to go into the next.
Yeah.
So it's getting that window of opportunity as well. I feel like it's been a bit like a masterclass rather than a chat. So thank you so much for all of that information. Like you mentioned, the blog post, we'll definitely put that in the show notes, and that's been incredibly useful. I've never done a outline. This is what I was saying, these 5 minutes in or 10 minutes in.
Oh, okay.
But I think that's incredibly useful. I know we've worked recently on the workshop, and what's been really great for me is you have been diligent about that, saying, how many minutes are you going to talk about that? And it's probably helped me by getting the work I would have had to do eventually done earlier. And that just makes me feel more comfortable. So I think there's a lot of value in that, in anything, even if you are doing a talk at work, for a meeting, it doesn't have to be just at, conference level. So that's a really good tip. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hannah, out of everything you've said today, what do you want the key takeaway for the listeners to be?
I would just go back to my original point, right? Like, don't worry about whether or not you're sufficiently expert enough to give a talk. Instead, pitch a talk that only you could give, one that is rooted in your lived experience. That will be absolutely wonderful. A talk about your lived experience, insights from your unique and wonderful mind. Those are the things, those are the types of talks I believe conference organisers love to stage and attendees love to watch. So that is, I think, the strongest piece of advice.
It's a very, very big, important piece of advice. Thank you for that. Now, Hannah, we ask all of our guests a couple of questions. One is, out of everyone out there who, many, many people are doing some amazing things, who do you think we should be following, paying attention to, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm going to shout out Areed Abu Ali and also Erin Simmons, who do incredible work for the Women in Tech SEO community. And also my good friend Kirsty Hulse, who I think talks wonderful, good sense all of the time and is fun to follow on LinkedIn, which is also nice.
She is a lot of fun to follow. So I follow her more on Instagram because she'll do all of the stories. And I think today she was saying, I'm really tired. After I do this bit of work, I'm going to get into bed. And it's just so refreshing to hear someone say that.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree with you on all three. Amazing, amazing people to follow. And in terms of career advice, what's the best career advice you've been given?
I'm a contrarian, so I'm going to say this. It's some advice about advice. I think it's a good idea to listen to advice, but it's not always a good idea to follow it. And here's why. All advice is rooted in the lived experience of the giver, not the receiver. As such, all advice is autobiographical. And whenever someone gives you advice, what they're actually doing is giving it to a past version of themselves. And because their lived experience may be quite different from yours, it's best to consider carefully the extent to which this advice is actually applicable to your situation. So yeah, listen to the advice. Don't always follow it, though. Don't feel like you have to follow it. It may or may not actually be for you.
I love that. And I agree so much with that. One of the people that I follow, she will say, never tell anyone what to do, because you don't know what their capacity for hard work is, or patience is, or curiosity or creativity. You're basing it on your capacity of all of those wonderful things and more. So you can listen to someone, you can be part of that story, but don't tell them what to do. Hannah, thank you so much for this. I was looking forward to it, and I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And I thought I'd really enjoy it. So thank you. And a lot of great tips for everyone who is listening, who wants to be pitching for those talks. It's beginning of 2025, lots of opportunities. If that's something you want to do, grab it, enjoy it. And if as the old saying goes, if you're scared to do it anyway, because it is a lot of fun.
It really, really is. It really, really is. I would encourage people to make the leap.
And all that's left for me to do to wrap up this episode is to remind everyone that if they're enjoying what Sarah and I are doing and would like to support the podcast, there's a variety of ways to do it. One, and the most direct way, is to click on the Buy Me a Coffee link, which is in the show notes, and give us a cheeky little cup of coffee. We save that for Brighton SEO, so we'll have a little lunch or a cup of coffee and a donut. So that's our Brighton treat. Leave us a review. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, let us know through the reviews what you think about it, and share the podcast with anyone and everyone, because like this talk today has shown you, it's not just for SEO people. Anyone in any industry that wants to put themselves forward for a conference or an event, all of this advice is hugely valuable. So thank you to everyone for listening, and thank you once again, Hannah. Take care.
Oh, thanks so much. Bye.
Don't forget about that live podcast happening the night before Brighton SEO, which is all about personal brand. Yep, the SEO Mindset and Search with Candor podcasts are teaming up again. It's happening Wednesday, the 9th of April, 2025 from 7 p.m. at Projects The Lanes. It's free to attend and there'll be free pizza, snacks, and drinks. Please help us to spread the word. Tell your friends, work colleagues, anyone and everyone. Help us shout it from the rooftops. It was a sellout last time, so to avoid that horrible FOMO feeling, grab your ticket today to secure your spot. Head on over to the show notes for the link, and we look forward to seeing you on the night.
Hi, Tasmin here. Are you looking to take your career to the next level? Be more visible, earn more, but also take care of your well-being and have work-life harmony? Well, I can help you because I'm offering you a free 30-minute consultancy call. Together we can go through where you want to be and how to get there. Simply click on the link in the show notes, fill in a form, and I'll get back to you.